Welcome on back to the Fourth and 30 podcast. This week we have a very special guest with us, a man who doesn't need very much introduction. If you've grown up in the tri state area, Northeast Missouri, Western Illinois, Southeast Iowa, you know who this person is. If you've been around, we've got Chris Duerr with us. So, Chris, how you doing tonight?
I'm fantastic, and certainly I am beyond privileged for the invite, gentlemen. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to all of this tonight. I don't know quite what to expect, so let the ambush begin.
So this week I went through your old hometown paper, the Grapevine, and I think it's changed its name to the Independent. We talked about here before the podcast. I ended a year too early to get the juice, but looks like you were on some pretty darn good Lancers teams over there, and your head coach name's Max Miller. Do you have any speeches from Mr. Miller that you remember? Is there anything you can recall from him?
So Max was a fantastic football coach, but Max was really bad with names. So for I had worked my way up the starting depth chart. By the time I was a senior, I was the starting right guard for our team, and my backup was a guy named Dobbs. So I was always interchangeably Duerr or Dobbs at any given moment. So it was always good when Max called me by the right name, partially. But you mentioned that the Cordova had a rich tradition. It's sort of where all of this comes from for me, sportscasting, because I grew up in a town not unlike what Quincy Blue Devil basketball is to this community that I'm living in now. Cordova Lancer football was the winningest high school football program in the nation right up until my senior year, and we all screwed it up going 6-2-1 and blew it big time for the tradition at that point. But turned out some really incredible players over the years. Seneca Wallace actually played at Cordova High School. Troy Taylor, who's now coaching Division One level, was an outstanding quarterback at Cal. I played with him. I played with Frank Griffin, who went on to play tight end at the University of Southern California. So had a chance to play with some really exceptional players. And that Cordova tradition over the years, I know it's dimmed a little bit in recent years, but that was something that community was incredibly and resonantly proud of. And I grew up my entire life wanting to be a Lancer. And, I was not a fantastic athlete. I was more of a self-made guy who lived in a weight room for 3 years and got to live out my dreams. I got to be a team captain, and I got to lead the Lancer Jacks, which was a big deal for all of us. So it really was a sort of a resonant part of me growing up. You guys all know. I mean, being in a communal situation like that where you have something greater than
Mhm.
yourselves to strive for, whether it's getting a chance to play for the team of your dreams when you were 5 and 6 years old, you looked up to those guys like they were superheroes.
Yep.
To winning a state championship, these are things that you guys know about. I mean, it's one of those things that really impacts the rest of your life, and hopefully in a very positive way for the rest of your life. So yeah, Cordova was a big part of the experience for me.
Yeah, another thing that kept popping up in the grapevine was this series of articles called "Life on the Big Burrito." Can you shed a little light on what in the world the Big Burrito
I
is?
never understood what that was either, but Doug Hawks always talked about the big burrito. I'm just assuming that was some sort of Rancho Cordova reference that I never got. Uh, I,
Is it?
the grapevine though, the highlight of my entire career was my senior year. We opened up with Bella Vista, and I'll never forget this. My picture was in the paper. I was an offensive lineman under the caption "Doer Dense Defense." Like I was set to block this kid named Mitch Facalana, and there was my picture. And I opened it up, and it was like the really cool thing about the grapevine. And Doug Hawks is a legend in Rancho Cordova because so many of us kids who played sports over the years, he was the guy that kind of did what I do now for kids and, kind of gave them a chance to shine. But in that particular moment for me, it was like all the hard work and all those years in the weight room going from, 135 to 225 and making those kind of moves from, being an eighth grader to being a senior and being a starter on a Cordova football team. Doug celebrated that stuff. And so I'm always cognizant of the fact that, I'm paying it forward from the late, great Doug Hawks, who, not only got a chance to do it for nobodies like me, but, there have been some pretty special people that came through that Cordova high school system in a lot of different ways, whether it was, Jerry Manuel, whether it was my good friend Brett Jenkins and his younger brother Jeff Jenkins, who a lot of you guys will remember from the Milwaukee Brewers and his wonderful run there. Dusty Baker. I mean, there were a lot of great Rancho Cordova guys that came through that system. So And, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Lester Holt was actually a Rancho Cordova guy before moving on to NBC News in the prime
Wow.
anchor spot there. So I'm only the second most famous television personality by a very large margin to come out of Rancho Cordova. So, yes.
So speaking of getting into broadcasting, how does a kid from Sacramento area end up going to Mizzou's journalism school?
I actually had a mentor, and he's a guy that people in St. Louis might remember by the name of Dan Gray, who was a sportscaster who moved from Sacramento to St. Louis eventually, and he started in Pittsburgh. And I actually coached his kid in Little League, and struck up a conversation. And he told me, "Hey, if you want to do this, if you're serious about this, if you want the best possible education, go to Mizzou." And I didn't initially do that. I spent a year and a half at Southern Cal in classes that had 400 and 500 people in them. And I'm like, this is not for me. This is not my vibe. And ended up transferring to Mizzou sight unseen, remembering Dan's tip, and fell in love with the Midwest. I mean, it's not hard to love Columbia, especially that experience going from, the ghetto in Los Angeles to living in, Columbia, Missouri, which at the time was, according to Rand McNally, the most livable city in the country. And it certainly, took one slice of Shakespeare's pizza and cute Midwest co-ed girls to make me realize I was in the right damn place.
Yeah. And then, from there you took a job in Jeff City, and then you eventually made your way up to Quincy with KHQA. So you've been at KHQA since '95, and what was the moment that you knew the community in this area? This is a community you just wanted to stay in. Like what was that? Do you have a moment early on where it's like this? It clicked for me.
I actually do. It was the first job offer I got to leave, and I went down and interviewed in Paducah, Kentucky. And it would have been a market jump for me of 100 places, which is a huge market jump in this business. They were offering me a chance to be their sports director, and I went down there. And I did the screen test. I did the best screen test of my life, and ended up they offered me the job, and they weren't going to let me walk out of there. And I just thought about it for a second, and I went, okay, so you're telling me you only want me to do 2 minutes of sports a night, and you really don't have a real local flavor. Why am I jumping this way when I've got it so good in Quincy? When I asked to do 10 minutes of sports on a Friday night, I get to do it. And it became really apparent to me very early that climbing the ladder was something that was really overrated. I mean, I enjoy enormous freedom, and you're reminded constantly here. This is one of the best sports cultures in the world. Every time some team from some corner of the tri-states goes on a state championship run, everybody's aboard. Doesn't matter what community they're from.
Yep.
Everybody's interested. And you can't find that anywhere else. And I'll be really honest with you. I think it might have gotten me the first time I went to Mizzou and listened to Crest Radio do a Friday night football broadcast and went, oh my God, this is heaven. This is they're spending, 2.5 hours after a game on End Zone. I'm listening to Ken Guiaba and Brad Boyer just killing it for 2 hours talking football. I'm like, I'm home. And I just, no place ever that has offered me ever since has even come close to matching the culture, the people, the environment, the opportunity to have freedom to do special things like we do. I mean, the do or die teams and the stuff that I get a chance to do, nobody else is doing that around the country because nobody else wants to spend the time and nobody else gets the kind of feedback. And, quite frankly, advertisers buy onto that. And I think that's why sports has been really successful here, is that we've made it participatory so everybody can be involved, and we've made it personal. We don't sit behind a desk in an ivory tower and try to cover sports by reading your sports scores. We're in your gyms every single night, trying to get to know you, trying to tell your stories, because while, in your prime, you're great centers and, quarterbacks and, catchers or whatever, what have you. The real storyline here is that that's setting the template for great community leaders and fathers and mothers and the people who will carry this generation to the next generation. So just to be a part of that fabric for so long, I mean, I can't ever envision leaving that. And the rush on a Friday night, the adrenaline, I mean, my job has adrenaline. How many people get to say that? Now, sometimes it's good adrenaline, and sometimes on Friday night when 2 videos are still not up online and I've got 2 minutes to air and I don't know what I'm looking at, that's not so much fun. But usually every single night you walk away from work and you can't sleep because you've either you're either on such a high or you're such a low because something went wrong and you're ready to do it again tomorrow. It's been really hard to ever escape that. And so, in a blink, 5 years have passed. I'm still here in the tri-states, but I couldn't be happier.
Going back
No, you.
to you talking about being in the gyms nightly, Chris, and that's something I was going to touch on when you mentioned that. Is I experienced it as a kid playing, and I experience it now as a coach watching the boys or the girls. When the news walks into the gym, no matter whether it be KHQA, WGM, whatever, when they walk in, they get amped up. But it's something special about when you get there. On a Friday night when Chris Duerr walks in the gym, somebody of your stature, I'm sure if you wanted to, you could sit behind a desk the whole time. But when you go out there and you're the guy in our gym recording, I can always count on our boys and girls to play at another level because Chris Duerr is there. And it's such an awesome thing to see. And I had the same experience when I was a kid and I was the one playing.
Well, for a small amount of money, Cody, I'm happy to show up at your gym. I'm very cheap and easy. But to be honest with you, on top of all of that, it's a selfish thing for me. I still enjoy that part of the job more than anything else, honestly, because catching a great highlight and making it look good on television, as easy as it looks. I mean, if you play compare and contrast some nights with, kids who just started out shooting, and sometimes we all are at the mercy of, having to borrow a shooter from news who's never shot sports before, you can tell a difference. And so when you're building you're building basically the cinematic equivalent of somebody's yearbook. They're going to keep that highlight forever,
Yes.
And I'm sure, if you go back and look somewhere, 2005 video is probably somewhere readily available somewhere in the Stoneburner household. So you can go back and relive it. I mean, it may be a different format than it was when you
VHS.
recorded it.
He's
Yes.
even made me watch it. So yeah.
No, I'm sure he had. I don't know if he's told you this or not, but he was quite good.
No, yeah, I remember.
I still am waiting to see the video of DeLashman putting back dunk over top of you at the South-Philly tournament.
Disproven.
All right, but we'll kind of transition into more, of the sports world here. And you're actually the first Sacramento Kings fan I've ever talked to. So, what do you think is the outlook for the Kings this year? Who's your up and comer? What do you think would make this a successful season for the Kings?
I think, well, it's a transitional year, first of all, obviously. Unfortunately for me, every year since 2007 has been, which is a long, awful, terrible run, I can assure you. But there have been some positives this year, which aren't always the case. I mean, obviously, Tyrese Halliburton's emergence is incredible. And I don't know how he dropped to us. I was stunned that he dropped to us that night. But I think what part of that was all of these years of bad karma with Vlade Divac's draft choices and some of the things that have gone wrong. Monte McNair comes in and he absolutely nails the draft. He gets that lovely break with Tyrese Halliburton, whose basketball IQ and floor vision has just been astounding. And I guess the rap against Tyrese Halliburton coming in was he does have a very non-conventional jump shot, especially his three-pointer. It looks long. It's like a lawn chair unfolding in very slow motion, but it's darn near impossibly effective, which has been incredibly fun to watch. But he got that. He got the Robert Woodard pick right, which was first-round value in the second round, which is the thing that Kings really have lacked all along, is a power wing. And he has killed it in his first couple of games in the G League, playing for Austin. He has been a sight to watch and a guy that a very bright future moving forward for the Kings in a position of need. And Jamias Ramsey has been pretty good as well, playing in the G League as well. So all three picks have future value, with which the Kings really, they don't have any pieces other than De'Aaron Fox and perhaps Marvin Bagley that they really consider franchise pieces going forward. So you go from 1 year to two guys to maybe 5 or 6 guys who are pieces of the long range frame. So in some respects, that's made this year very successful for the Sacramento Kings. I don't think the Kings are winning anything until they make the decision to move away from the worst coach in all of sports, Luke Walton, which League Pass brings home in sharp relief every single night. And if you're a Lakers fan, a Kings fan, I don't know that Warriors fans have the same experience we've had, but you want no part of the Luke Walton experience. It's frustrating and awful. But again, I think there has been signs of progress. Getting De'Aaron Fox on a max contract,
Yes.
committing to Sacramento for the next 7 years, foreseeably of his life. Wonderful, because he's been an all-star level player this year. Marvin Bagley starting to attack the rim and show the kind of bounce he showed at Duke. That's been a positive as well. And the really great thing about the Sacramento team is they've got a ton of flexibility moving forward. Marvin Bagley is the only power forward, I should say, or front court player at this moment who's actually locked in beyond this year. So they're going to have some choices to make. Obviously, Rashawn Holmes has been very good this year. They're going to have to make some choices if they want to go forward with him as the center. A lot of it's going to depend on the draft, and who knows, with this losing streak they're on, they could get back into that, that sweet spot in this year's really good draft in the top 6 picks where you're almost guaranteed a player who has a chance to change your franchise. But if not, they'll be in position to grab a wing in the 10 or 11 spot in the draft. So they've got a lot of flexibility and a lot of freedom moving forward. And I think they've got the right guy finally running this organization, and Monty McNair, who did such a great job on that, that Houston staff, now shown very quickly and in short order, he's pretty savvy with what he's done in Sacramento. And, you got to make some determinations. Are you keeping Harrison Barnes long range, or are you going to trade him while the selling price is pretty high? Same thing with Buddy Hield. Those are 2 questions you got to ask yourself. If it's me, I'm selling on all those guys, on both those guys. Yeah. If Boston, is willing to offer me draft capital for Harrison Barnes tomorrow, I'm taking it, whether it's Aaron Nesmith or, Semi Ojale or, whatever young piece I can get in that puzzle and some draft capital, I'm going for it. I don't know what the market is for Buddy Hield, although he's shooting the ball much better. So maybe Philadelphia bites. Sadly, I don't think they, bite to the tune of Matisse Thybulle, but Matisse Thybulle, excuse me. But I wish they would, because that kind of defensive guy is exactly what the Kings need.
Yeah. Would you say this is the best outlook the Kings have had since the early to late 2000s?
I'd say there was that moment in time where the Kings had Cousins. They were 4 games over 500. You had a head coach who is a fantastic head coach, and Michael Malone. You had all the pieces in place, and then Boogie goes out and he gets meningitis, and everything falls off the rails. I mean, that was the point where they'd acquired Rudy Gay, got Rudy Gay to sign in long term. They had a bunch of pieces that seemed to be working right, and then it all fell off a cliff like it usually does if you're a Sacramento Kings fan. I'd say this is the best outlook since then. I mean, you've got to remember the last Kings playoff team, started the insane combination of Ron Artest and Bonzi Wells at the wing forward positions, which, I don't know that there's enough, I don't know that there was enough cops to be had in the city of Sacramento to keep that group in line.
Yeah, well, I mean, the future's definitely bright with De'Aaron Fox. That he's special. Halliburton's looking just as good, equally as promising. And you got a few other young guys. As a Portland fan, we didn't have room for Whiteside on the roster anymore. We were running 4 centers deep, but I think that's a good pickup. I don't know that he'll ever be an all-star level player again, but he's going to lead the league in blocks or be up there. It's always nice to have a defensive centerpiece like that. And if they can continue to build around Fox and Halliburton and, pick up a few pieces, like you said, I'd like to see them push. I'd rather not see them. Or I guess if they got a good draft pick this year, that would be better off for them in the long run. But, I think they're right there on the edge of not contender-ish, but being in that playoff mix with that bottom set of teams in the West.
Yeah, I would. I kind of tend to agree. Buddy Hield and Harrison Barnes, I'd have them on the trade block.
Gotta go.
Buddy Hield, he's a player that on that team he may not be shining as what he could on a different team, like maybe the Warriors, or a team that's already contending for a title. You put Buddy Hield on a team like that in today's game. A 3-point shooter like that, he can change the dynamic of your team. Harrison Barnes, I think the price for him is as high as it'll ever be. Maybe they can get some draft capital for that. And then if they can hit on those draft picks and then maybe go out and sign a superstar, I think that might be the recipe to, get back in it. It's obviously easier said than done, but with De'Aaron Fox and Marvin Bagley, they've got the start. They just need to finish it.
Yeah, Sacramento's a unique situation because you're not really going to draw that superstar ever to town. I mean, when Jeff Petrie did it, he did it a really unconventional way, and he put the franchise on mortgage, essentially saying we're going to try to trade Mitch Richmond for Chris Webber and see what happens. And fortunately for the fact that the Lakers were willing to part with Vlade Divac in exchange for the rights to draft Kobe. People forget Sacramento was sitting right there in that position when everything kind of switched around with Charlotte and everything, and made that trade happen. Sacramento, Jeff Petrie was able to capitalize. So in Sacramento, you always have to overpay players, which is why De'Aaron Fox got the Supermax, right out of the gate. And we're happy to do it because we don't have a guy like that. We haven't had a great point guard since Mike Bibby. So it's nice to see them do that. They overpaid for Harrison Barnes, but that contract, if you look at it long term, becomes really flexible. And with like a team like Boston having the exemption, they can eat and absorb that, for really cheap and have a guy like Harrison Barnes on their roster who fits it. You guys talked about Buddy Hield. I mean, yeah, Buddy Hield can shoot the ball. He doesn't offer you much else, but if you're a team like Philadelphia and you're looking for a shooter, he would seem to be a guy that fits. So yeah, I mean, they have some pieces to trade. And there's no chance that they can make a run, even at best case scenario this year. So, I think as a Kings fan, and I hate to say this because I've said it for 14 years straight, but you have to look big picture and you have to continue to look long term. At least now you're doing it with De'Aaron Fox locked up, with Tyrese Halliburton looking like he's the perfect fit next to Fox, and, with Marvin Bagley showing some signs yet again. Like I said, I mean, when Marvin Bagley is good, there's nobody on the league who moves quite like he does. And there's a lot of pre-knee injury Amari Stoudemire to his game. He's not going to defend anybody. He's certainly not going to help you at that end of the floor. But if you need somebody to come in and find you buckets at the offensive end, Marvin Bagley has speed and skill. So, there are some pieces. To be in that position for
the core is there for sure.
So you mentioned Bagley a couple times, and he's the only front court guy you have after this year. I think he's up at the end of next year, I believe. Do you want him in Sacramento long term?
Depends on the price. I see. I'm a Marvin Bagley guy, and I never blamed Vlade as much as it is. Hindsight's 2020, and Luka is amazing. Put in that position, and if I'm trying to build fast around De'Aaron Fox, who makes more sense as a power forward next to De'Aaron Fox in a pick and roll than the fastest guy who was available in that draft? So I never, and I'm wrong. I admit I'm wrong, but because Luka is just a once in a lifetime generational player. But by the same token, if you were trying to play fast, I see that. But they ran into the weird situation where Vlade was trying to build a really fast team and ended up, kind of screwing it up and hiring coaches who wanted to play off pace. I love Dave Yeager. I thought Dave Yeager was a great coach, but slowing down De'Aaron Fox doesn't make a lot of sense. And Luke Walton slowed their pace terribly last year. This year, at least, they're playing at a higher pace. And I don't know if that was Monty McNair telling Luke Walton, hey, you're going to play at pace. You're going to play at a Houston Rockets pace, absent James Harden at the time, eating up every possession and dribbling the ball into the floor. But you're going to play at a pace that actually makes sense for the personnel that you have. And to Luke Walton's credit, I think a lot of that's Elvin Gentry being on that staff as well. They have done that this year, and they've let De'Aaron Fox be De'Aaron Fox, which is why he's in the All-Star conversation.
So, to me, Sacramento, right?
Question, yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on the price.
Right. Yeah.
To me, Sacramento right now reminds me of Phoenix like 2 or 3 years ago. They had pieces, you could tell they were starting to put it together, but they were still not a great team, but you could tell like, hey, here in a couple years, that talent's going to develop. So Sacramento's sitting in kind of a sweet spot right now. But we're going to go back in time a little bit. Early 30s, Chris Duerr in May, sitting on your couch, watching a series between your Kings and the Lakers, 2002 Western Conference Finals. So there's a lot of controversy in that series, and I have never heard any of it from the perspective of a Kings fan. So why don't you just go ahead and walk us through? Maybe you can start it wherever you want in there, but we need to talk about Game 6 specifically. But
I'm not a conspiracy theory guy. I'm really not. And I will also say this in full disclosure. that you had in that series the greatest shooter of his generation not able to hit a single shot against the Lakers because Peja Stojakovic was useless for the entirety of that series. Gets talked about in the controversy about, the officiating, in the, did Vlade tap it to Robert Horry? Oh God, that still hurts to talk about. But that game 4 where we should have been up 3-1, and instead I find myself running down Main Street in Quincy with tears streaming down my face, screaming at Big Shot Bob, who I will punch if I ever see him in person. Caused me in my lifetime. Because, if the Kings are up 3-1, they're not losing that series. I don't know that, it was Sacramento's biggest moment, period, as a sports town ever. It was that, and they were on the cover of Sports Illustrated. They were the best passing team in basketball at the time. They took it to a level that made it art for people who didn't care about basketball. They were a lovable underdog, playing against what I will argue was an incredibly stacked Laker team. I would say 2002 was the height of the Kobe Shaq dynamic. I mean, they were never better. And just watching Shaq destroy Vlade nightly, and Vlade trying to flop and try to make something out of a matchup that he couldn't was, it was hard as a Kings fan, but also you had an appreciation for the fact, begrudgingly, while he was calling your team the Queens, just how good Shaq was at peak Shaq time. So, it was such a weird series because, again, I thought this was the moment. We were destined, game 4 up into the last shot, 3-1. We were going to be 3-1 on the Lakers. They, even with Kobe and Shaq at their best, would have never pulled out of that hole. And that Horry shot just changed everything. It changed the trajectory of everything. It was Sacramento Kings, Bill Buckner trying to field the ball thing. That's the only metric equivalent I can make of that Horry shot hurts me to this day, is that's the moment when it all fell apart. And it was unrecoverable from there. And again, there were a million other things that went wrong in that series. And as much as I love Peja, I still look back at that and go, hit a jump shot. You hit one jump shot, it's a different series. But he was invisible. And that's not something you expect to see from a guy who was that level of shooter in his career, who I think history has kind of forgotten how good Peja was as a 3-point shooter. He never gets mentioned in the conversation of the best, 10 best or 15 best shooters of all time. But I would assert to you that at his peak, he belonged in that conversation because he was a special, special talent on the wing. And that was such a great Kings team. People forget how deep that Kings team was and how good that bench was. Everybody kind of remembers Bobby Jackson and maybe a little bit of Scott Pollard playing their enforcer. But that team had John Barry, and John Barry was just so good off the bench, knocking down jumpers and, playing tough. That team still had Hito Turkoglu just when he was starting to become pre-prime at that point in his career. Doug Christie swung between starting and, coming off the bench and was the perfect defensive matchup guy. I mean, that Kings team was just so absolutely loaded. And I would argue that is one of the 3 best teams in the history of the NBA to not win an NBA title, just based on that lineup, that talent matchup, a great coach in Rick Adelman, who doesn't get enough credit historically as well, and one of the best GMs of all time. So, that moment will haunt me for the rest of my natural sports life, probably because it's the only time I will ever get close to seeing my beloved Sacramento Kings win a title. But I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that series was also anything less than super fun, at least in terms of being able, after years and years and years of watching terrible Kings teams, to see your team elevated to that level. In your hometown of all things. It was just an amazing experience. So as much as I regret the mourning period of all of it on the back end of it, it was a super moment in my sports fandom, and one that, if you ever rooted for a team that felt jinxed, that was the moment that felt like everything was worth every bit of blood, sweat, and tears. You've poured into it. Now take off that satanic jersey.
Going back
I was at North Shelby when we were going 0-60 in football, so I've been there.
Going back to the Kings, you mentioned how good that team was, and I don't think any of us disagree with how talented that team was and how deep, but how much fun they were to watch too. when your center is arguably the second best passer on your team, your power forwards in that conversation as well. They ran, they could all handle the ball. They played relatively good on defense. They were fun. They were so much fun to watch. Watching them run the intricacies of their offense.
I got all four of you here. Does anybody here believe that Chris Webber isn't a Hall of Famer?
No.
No, I believe he is, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I still don't. I know that there's a lot of bad blood with the Michigan guys, and a lot of that is still played into it. But Weber, pre the knee injury, was as good as there was in the power forward position.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at him metrically, obviously Tim Duncan, obviously Kevin Garnett. You've had some amazing power forwards in the last couple of decades. But I think if you look at it statistically, if you look at it impact wise, Chris Webber's right there.
Yes.
And if you're trying to make a Hall of Fame argument for Chris Bosh, I would admonish you that Chris Webber has a place in line ahead of Chris Bosh.
100%.
I think you can forget historically just how good Chris Webber was and how he changed the entire complexion of a franchise. Chris Bosh never did that. Chris Bosh was part of something special. And I think Chris Bosh was an amazing player dating back to Georgia Tech. But he did not change an entire franchise on his shoulders alone. Or else, the Toronto Raptors would have been much better earlier in his career. So
yeah, he had the opportunity to do that.
I think Chris, to some degree, neither did Kevin Garnett in Minnesota. So, and neither did Chris Webber early on. I think it takes some time in your career to get to that point. But yes,
yeah,
I just think, having had a chance to watch that team, getting a chance to watch prior to that Jason Williams do his thing, which was just obscene, going back to the elbow pass and the nightly highlights. I can't ever remember having more fun as a sports fan.
I think one thing people forget, the Kings were the 1 seed in the West that year. They were better than the Lakers that year. That's how good that team was. Even with Kobe and Shaq at the height of their career, that team was the 1 seed in the West that year. They had home court advantage in that series.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's one of.
Go ahead, Chris. So yeah,
I just think that's
you referred to it, Rick Adelman. I mean, I remember turning on my TV and watching Kings games during that time period. And Doug Christie's the one player I remember because, like you said, he'd start, then he'd come off the bench. The unselfishness on that team is what helped propel that team. And I do think they were the best team at that time. The Lakers just had Shaquille O'Neal, who, like you said, nobody can do anything about that. And the Kings had him right where they wanted him. And, that's the thing that sticks out to me. I was a 11-year-old kid at the time, and I just remember watching the Kings and just how well they played offense. It was just a beautiful thing to watch. And it's, they deserved probably to win that series. Unfortunately, the Lakers did. But I thought they deserved it, and it's unfortunate. But Doug Christie was my favorite player on that team.
Doug Christie was fun to watch.
To your Chris Bosh and Chris Webber comparison, Chris Webber in his prime, I don't think Chris Bosh compares to Chris Webber. That dude just had a little bit more in his arsenal. He was more athletic and just as skilled. No offense to Chris Bosh, but I would have loved to seen Chris Webber not have that knee injury and seen what he could do for his whole career.
So to defend Sacramento a little bit, do you think Kobe got food poisoning?
Of course we did. Some nameless hero at the Hyatt Regency tried to food poison Kobe, as well they should have. And if I'd been on staff that night, I would have too. I mean, to your point, gentlemen, I think one thing about the Lakers that doesn't get sold enough, and we talk about the talent, but Phil Jackson, I think you saw in that series just how masterful, an orchestrator of talent he is as well. So that's another thing that I think, goes by the wayside a little bit, and going gaga over, Kobe and Shaq, that was an all-time great NBA coach with an all-time great NBA roster. So Sacramento may have been doomed a little bit by that as well. But yeah, Kobe was special. I mean, and maybe the only way you could have beaten him was by food poisoning him at the Hyatt Regency. But at least we tried. If you're not cheating, you're not trying.
That's right. Well, we're going to transition a little bit. We're going to get into the top 2 players at each position in the NBA currently. This is something we've done on previous podcasts. We've tried to kind of rank people here and there. But we'll start at point guard. So, Kelsey, who do you think are the two best point guards in the NBA right now?
I think number one's pretty obvious, and we've talked about this. I think in the previous podcast, the podcast before, Steph Curry, I think is alone at the top as the best point guard in the league. Number two, I think it's tighter than anyone in this podcast would like to admit. But number two, I'll give it to Lillard, but I think that Kyrie isn't as far behind as you think he is.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and say that we'll probably all agree on Steph Curry and be number one. But number two, I'm gonna say Damian Lillard, and Kyrie's not even number three on my list. Luka Doncic would be number three on my list. But I think it's pretty close between Luka and Damian. But with what Damian's accomplished compared to Luka so far, I'd have to put him above Luka.
Yeah, I'm going to keep mine the exact same. Steph, I'm not going to go to the length to say miles ahead of everyone, but he's definitely the best point guard in the league. And then I'm going to put Dame second. He's just having an incredible year. Part of me, I don't necessarily disagree with the All-Star voting with Luka being the starter because of how special Luka is and Dame not starting. But Luka is a pseudo point guard. He plays point guard for the Mavericks, but he's trapped in a shooting guard small forward frame. So, I consider him more of a shooting guard than a point guard because of how well he scores the ball. But he's third on my list if you're talking point guards, and he's number probably one on my list if you're talking shooting guards.
I have Curry at one, but I do have Luka at two on my list just because Luka is somebody I drop everything to build a franchise around right now. Like, he's young, he's got all the boxes you want to check. Like, I think Luka is going to be a name that we're all going to talk about for the better part of the next 15 years.
I'm going to agree with everybody on Steph. I think that the way Steph has played this year, especially considering the circumstances in Golden State with the talent around him, speaks volumes to where he's at. I would tend to lean Dame at number two, although I think you've got a really rich tapestry of really good point guards out there. Guys that we're not talking about. Obviously, I'm going to champion De'Aaron Fox a little bit. John Morant's been phenomenal at times this year. I don't think we talk enough about Chris Paul, even at this point in his career, about the difference he's made in Phoenix. So, I think the 1-2 are pretty obvious, but and again, I think like Cody, I don't consider Luka per se a point guard organically. But yes, I mean, within Rick Carlisle's offense, that's what he does. And I mean, he's obviously a top 5 guy in the NBA, no matter how you stack it. So I think I would side with you guys that it's, probably the consensus pick is, going Steph and then going Dame.
I agree with your point on Chris Paul, Chris. He seems to kind of get forgotten. But we all see the difference he makes on a team in OKC last year.
Exactly.
It's hard to put him up there because he doesn't put up the numbers, but I think there's an argument to be made there for Chris Paul.
All right, so who do you guys got as shooting guard then? Kelsey?
I actually had Luka as my number one shooting guard. So you guys stole that at point guard. I agree that he's not a point guard in a typical offense, even though that's what he plays in Dallas most of the time. And then I had a really tough time deciding who my number two shooting guard was. I'm actually probably going to lean towards someone that no one else is going to pick just because of what he's done in the NBA, regardless of how down he's looked upon because of his time in Houston. I'm going to go with James Harden. I know people cringe at his style of play,
goodness.
And there's a lot of people not fans of him. But the fact of the matter is, if you play him kind of like they played him, I'd say 2 years ago in Houston, how Dallas plays Luka right now, play him at the point as a facilitator, I think he can be a very valuable player for a team. And I think that's what they're going to do going forward in Brooklyn. He's going to be more of a facilitator as opposed to a guy who's trying to get 47 free throws a night. But yeah, I think I'm going to go Luka 1, James 2.
I'm gonna agree with the Luka at shooting guard. Luka number 1. He's special. Like I say all the time, he's crazy good. And number 2, I'm gonna go with Bradley Beal. He just scores the ball at such a crazy rate and you can't when Houston lost with James Harden scoring 40 a game, people would blame it on Harden's play style, whether it was or was not Harden's fault. No one blames the Wizards' struggles on Bradley Beal. That guy plays the game correctly, and he does it so phenomenally. He just doesn't have much help around him. So I'm going to go Bradley Beal at a close second behind Luka.
It's kind of hard to do these rankings, with the positions that people play now. I myself would consider Luka more of a point guard. I mean, he's got the ball in his hands 80% of the time. So I'd more consider him more of a point guard. James Harden's playing more of a true shooting guard role now that he's in Brooklyn. And I would have to, I'd have to take James Harden number one. He's the most talented. And then for number two is a tough. I'm gonna throw Donovan Mitchell in there. I mean, the Jazz are sitting at 26-5, number one in the West, and they had a decent squad when he came into the league, and he took right off, first in the West, and he's their superstar. So I'm gonna throw Donovan Mitchell over there ahead of Bradley Beal.
Not a bad pick at all.
Yeah, it's looking like we're all going to have a different person on our shooting guard list. But I have Harden at number one, but then I have Devin Booker at number two. So Booker plays basketball at a very high level, and he can score when he needs to and all that. He's got Phoenix in a pretty good position. Yeah, Chris Paul has helped him out, kind of relieve some of the load off of him a little bit and distributing the ball, but Devin Booker is a heck of a basketball player down there. So,
yeah.
Chris, you got two shooting guards?
Well, I thought I was going to surprise you guys by going off the board because my number one shooting guard was Spida Mitchell, just based on the fact that nobody has been better at this particular moment in time. He's the movement piece for Utah, and he's the reason that Quinn Snyder has been successful. And if you look at the last 3 weeks of the season, I'm not sure any guard has had as wide-ranging an impact on his particular team as Spida Mitchell has had. And they're winning, in a way that's fun to watch because he impacts so many different aspects of the game at this point. So I would have went Spida Mitchell and then probably Bradley Beal, just based on the wide-ranging impact he has on a team that, isn't very good, but he's such an important piece on at this particular time. So I made this point last year and I thought I was going to get laughed off Twitter, but it's starting to become resonant. I think there's a path for Donovan Mitchell to be an MVP in his career at some point in the NBA. That level of player, and obviously, I don't know how much you guys watch Utah, but I enjoy and adore watching them play, and he's the major reason why at this point. So he'd be my number one at the two. And again, I don't know what to do with Luka positionally. He's just such a multi-positional dude that you could kind of make an argument at 4 spots for him if you really wanted to. There's time where Luka looks like a Larry Bird 4. So, take your pick with Luka and put him at whatever position you want. But I am gonna champion Spida Mitchell at this particular point. And I'm gonna make mention of the fact that if the Kings had been smart, they could have drafted De'Aaron Fox and Donovan Mitchell in the same draft. Had their backcourt set for years and years and years to come.
Yeah, Donovan's been doing it for so long. Like, people don't realize how good Spida was his rookie year and then the years since then, too.
Because he's stuck in Utah. Nobody cares about Utah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, but he has been special since the day he stepped foot in the NBA.
He was special before if you watched Louisville when he was in college, that dude was special there. I was surprised at how far he dropped in the draft. But while we're on the shooting guard position, it used to be Michael Jordan. The shooting guard used to be the most coveted position, when I was growing up. It's kind of fallen by the wayside now. More people are, with the more freedom that the positions have in today's game. It's been kind of interesting for me to see how, there aren't. You're more of a point guard or a small forward, I guess, traditionally, and that position's kind of fallen off the wayside to me. I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on that.
Well,
Yeah.
it's because you build more. Teams are built more for 3-pointers now. So your two guy is pretty much your best 3-point shooter. He's a spot up guy on a lot of the teams. It's not isolation basketball like Kobe and Jordan played. I mean, yeah, you have a point guard who might create for your team, but they're not going one-on-one trying to get to the bucket like they did. Now you've got 2 spotting up, 4 spotting up, and you've got I mean, you got LeBron or Luka Doncic, but other than that, isolation basketball pretty much doesn't exist in the NBA anymore.
A guy whose name didn't come up is Jimmy Butler. Where are you guys at on Jimmy Butler?
I consider Butler a 3, to be honest, but and that's what Kelsey just said with positionless basketball nowadays. You could put Jimmy at the 2 or the 3, and I don't think anybody would bat an eye either way.
I do think he's listed as a 2.
Yeah, he probably is. But he's special as well. It just goes to show how much talent there is in the NBA right now. Where a guy like Jimmy Butler wasn't on any of our 5 lists for top 2, and he's a very special talent.
All right. So, Chris, who you got for small forwards then? We'll start with you this time.
Well, I'm going to make an argument. I'm again with positionless stuff. I think depends on what you consider LeBron. I consider LeBron a 3 based on all of his utility and the fact that he would be the number 1 kind of as a runaway. I guess at this particular time, especially with what he's done absent AD. I think you could go a lot of different ways with this one. Zach Levine has been incredible this year. If you consider him a 3, and I kind of do, based on the way he's played. Specific to that case, I know Chicago's not great, but he has such a hand in, and I'm a hand in guy. But I'm actually going to go off the board instead and try to make the argument to all of you that the second best small forward in the league right now, based on what he's done this year and based on the way he's as good a two-way player as there is in the league, is Jaylen Brown. And maybe that's a bizarre argument to make, but I don't think anybody does more two ways than Jaylen Brown does at this particular point in his career. I also think the world of him just because he's such a smart, interesting dude on top of everything else. So maybe I'm fanning out a little bit here, but I just want to get the argument in that I think Jaylen Brown belongs in the conversation of best 3s in the league right now.
That's a hot take there, Chris. And, Jaylen Brown's a likable dude, and he's averaging like 25, 26 points a game this year. I take LeBron number 1. I don't think anybody's going to disagree on that one. And I'm going to stick to the board. I'm going to go with Kawhi Leonard as second. I just think what he's capable of, what he's shown capable of, winning a title. I'm going to put him number 2.
Yeah,
I'm in that same boat. I mean, Kawhi's won multiple titles, LeBron's won multiple titles, so I obviously have LeBron at number 1, Kawhi at number 2, but I think until somebody can prove that different, I don't see much room for wiggle between those two.
I agree that LeBron 1, Kawhi 2. I do kind of knock Kawhi for the load management stuff. He's still in his prime. He's starting to get up there in age, but he's not there yet. I don't think superstars should be taking games off like that until you start reaching LeBron's age. But Kawhi's number 2 in my book. I think Chris makes a great point with Levine. I don't remember the stat today, but I saw something from ESPN today. He's now in a category with Michael Jordan when it comes to Bulls and scoring the basketball. It was I can't remember how many points in an 8-game stretch, but
he's averaging almost 30 a game at this point.
And it was scoring. He scored whatever it would have been, 240 points or whatever in an 8-game stretch, and only Michael Jordan is the only other Bull who's ever done that. So, when you're on a list with Michael Jordan, you're doing something special.
What was Levine's quote the other day? I only fear God and my dad, or something like that.
Yeah.
So you guys are all forgetting about the best small forward in the league right now, and that's Kevin Durant at number 1 and LeBron at number 2. KD is about as impossible guard as there is in the league. I don't think anybody wants to try and defend him one-on-one. He rebounds the ball just about as good as LeBron. He probably plays better defense than LeBron at this point in his career. The only thing LeBron does better, I would say, is facilitate. Still is a better facilitator. But as far as trying to defend somebody, KD is about impossible to defend. I'd take him at 1 and LeBron at 2 right now.
I can't abide KD as a 3 because I don't think KD has played anything metrically that looks like a 3 in years. He's been a stretch 4 and a stretch 5 throughout the course of this run. So I get the point, and I'm not going to dispute KD's greatness. I just don't know that you can call him a 3 anymore.
That's fair. That's fair.
Talk about a positionless guy, though. I mean,
Oh,
KD
absolutely.
can do it all.
That dude's an enigma.
And that's the thing is, if you categorize Kevin Durant as a 3, yes, I think he's better than Kawhi. And I don't know, LeBron's at MVP pace right now. You would think by this point in time in LeBron's career, Durant would pass him up. But they would be 1 and 2. But I was going to put Durant in the 4 slot just because, skill set, he's 1 through 3. But when it comes to the actual position he plays on the floor, he's usually out there at power forward for him.
Yeah, so power forward, I had Durant as a power forward as well. And then my second would be Giannis, like Antetokounmpo, or however you want to say his last name, not quite sure. The Greek Freak, that guy's just, he's super athletic. He tries very hard on the defensive end. He's everything you kind of want down there. And as the NBA shifts towards smaller and smaller, 5-man rosters, he's your perfect guy to have down there because he can hang with anybody. And he's just a monster. So
yeah, I'm going same thing. I'm going KD, Giannis. KD is such a matchup nightmare for what he does from a skill position. His ability to do everything on the floor offensively, and not a bad defender by any means, I don't think. And then Giannis, you're getting everything out of a guy in a freak body with freak athleticism. I mean, there's a reason his nickname's the Greek Freak. That dude, he runs well, he jumps well, he defends at an above elite a level, and he scores the ball, maybe not necessarily in the most pretty way or glamorous way, but he scores the basketball, and at a very efficient rate as well.
I'm gonna switch things up on y'all a little bit. I'm gonna go KD obviously number 1. I had him as a 4, and then I'm gonna take Anthony Davis over Giannis, and here's why. Giannis is a great player, but I still think he needs to develop a jump shot. I feel like he's great for 3 quarters, but his talent level falls off for a little bit in the 4th quarter when teams build that wall up and really dig down on defense. So I'm taking AD just due to the fact that if I had a championship ready team, I think I'd rather have AD on my team right now than Giannis, just of what he would bring. And I just would like to see Giannis develop a little bit more of a jump shot to take his game to the next level.
I'd have a lot of problems with AD's fragility in taking him over the Greek Freak. So
Yeah.
I'm going to side with you guys and go 1-2 KD. I think KD is 1 with a bullet for me. Giannis is 2, but I want to broaden the conversation a little bit because I think the power forward position is wildly undersold this year. I think you look at a guy like Domantas Sabonis, and as good as he's been, and nobody has talked about what he's done in Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of people are talking about Julius Randle and the season he's had. I love Bam Adebayo. I think his two-way game is phenomenal. I think the power forward position is as loaded as it has been in years. So I think there's a rich tapestry. I think you have a clear 1 and 2. And, if AD is healthy, a clear 1, 2A and 2B there. But I do think that there is a wealth of wonderful power forwards in the league right now. And that's sort of contributed to some of the fun we're seeing in the front courts, around the league at this particular point in time. Everywhere from Boston to Phoenix, you got guys who can play. So that's kind of fun to watch.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I actually had it marked down on my notes, Sabonis at 3 or 4 with Adebayo there and AD, I guess 3, 4, 5. I think AD from a skill level is above those guys. But I feel like Sabonis is a little overshadowed by Adebayo because Adebayo helped the crazy great run last year in the bubble to the finals and won the skills competition and had a lot of buzz about him. But what Sabonis does quietly in Indiana is pretty special as well. But I mean, you've got 5 guys there at the power forward position, 6 guys there that you could build a franchise around, and they're used to be what was just a bruiser position. Now are 4, 5, 6 of the most skilled guys in the NBA.
Yeah, I had Giannis and AD as well. I did want to bring up Julius Randle, though. I mean, it's hard to put him over. I had KD, obviously, as a small forward. Hard to gloss over what Julius Randle's done this year, making New York somewhat relevant as they can be um, this season. He's playing at an incredible rate. But I had AD and Giannis.
And then for centers, we have to start with Cody. So Cody,
I
who do
think
you
it's pretty clear cut. Now, where you put them, 1 or 2, is up to personal opinion. But I think it's pretty much got to be Jokich and Embiid. Both are just superbly talented. I mean, they're fun to watch. They're great. They're so skilled. I'm gonna take Jokic 1 because of his depth of his passing. That's what I feel like he just adds a little extra. Embiid, you're getting the scoring, maybe a little prettier scoring, a little more range, even though Jokic still shoots the ball relatively well.
and a lot more dominance.
But Jokic facilitates as well. And if I was starting a team, I want to, if I can get a center who can facilitate as well as score the ball, I'm taking that every time.
Yeah, I think after the centers, as you're talking about power forwards, the centers I think kind of aren't quite as strong this year. Joel Embiid, Nicole Jokic, those guys are fantastic. They got their teams in the competing for championships. When centers don't really do that much anymore. And Joel Embiid is my favorite. If the season ends today, I pick him to win the MVP. So what he's doing is phenomenal. I think I'm going to keep him at number 1 due to that, and Nicole Jokic number 2. I wanted to try to mix it up, but I think really the only 2 guys after that you can throw in close to their conversation are Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns, and there's an obvious disparity between them.
Yeah, Embiid, I mean, I don't know that you've ever seen a center that can face the basket and score the way that Embiid can score the basketball facing the basket. Um, he can do everything and then some. Jokic is a better passer, but pretty much every other aspect of the game, I would take Embiid over Jokic, and then Jokic number 2. But both phenomenal centers, and both, as you guys said, have their teams at the top of their conference. Like I said on our previous podcast, you can't win by building around a center, though. So in the end, it won't matter. But those are the top 2 centers in the league for sure.
Still think you're wrong, man. I think you can
I
still
do
do
too,
it.
Carl. I do too.
If you've got somebody like Embiid, we all grew up in just watching these marvelous big guys go to town. Like, we grew up in the Shaq era. We had David Robinson down there banging it out. We were on the tail end of Patrick Ewing, the tail end of Dream, like all this stuff. Like, you can still win playing through the 5. I'm going to die on this hill with my phone right beside me, tweeting you guys saying you were wrong. Like, it's gonna happen. You can still play through the 5 because when you can create that much havoc on those high percentage shots, the math just works out. And so there's just not that much skill because most people that grow up nowadays, they want to handle the ball and do all this stuff. They don't grow up, beating and banging and throwing elbows down there anymore. But, that's going to start to come back as guys start to get pissed off. Like, it's going to happen. It's coming.
So the only thing I'll say about this is Kyler just said a second ago the reason why he didn't rank Giannis higher was because in the fourth quarter he's less effective because he doesn't have a jump shot. And now Kyler's arguing that you can build around a
Embiid and
5,
Jokic have a jump shot.
but
They're a
they
5.
can't create like a guard can. And that's the argument I made last time. I'm not saying you can't have a great center and win a championship, but you better have a guard that can create late in games to win. Because in the fourth quarter, I mean, you have to have
Trust
somebody
me,
creating.
Embiid is creating plenty of offense for them.
You have to have pieces around. If you have a Kobe, a Jordan, a Tracy McGrady, guys who can score the
Pieces
ball
around them too.
you have
pieces
to be able
around
to space the
anything.
floor. But in Jokic or Embiid situation, you have to have shooters. You have to. Now, if you have the shooter pieces to go around those guys, by all means, you can win from the 5. By all means, you can. But if you got 4 Ben Simmonses out there, you don't stand a chance. You're going to get run out of every gym you go into. So, I mean,
it doesn't matter who you're building around. If you have 4 Ben Simmons, point guard, shooting guard, don't matter. You're not going to win. Chris, do you have anything different on the centers?
I do not. In fact, I have Embiid ahead of Joker because he's probably one of my favorite players to watch. I'm to the point, though, of asking this question, gentlemen. Is Nikola Jokic the best passing big man ever? I
No.
mean,
no, Sabonis.
Who do we have ahead of him?
Arvidas.
So-
He's at least the best since Brad Doherty.
According to Greg Popovich, Tim Duncan was the starting 5 for 20 years down there, and Tim Duncan was one heck of a passer. So my vote is Tim Duncan. Granted, my favorite player of all time, but that's besides the point.
I've said it so many times, and I will say it again. I'll take it to my grave. Arvidas Sabonis was a magician with the basketball, an absolute magician. And we got him straight out of the USSR, 50 pounds overweight, in his 30s, and he was still wonderful in the NBA. If we could have got a taste of him when he was in his 20s and he was built like Wilt Chamberlain, I mean, that guy was ripped and massive and athletic for how big he was. So I don't know that that's what his game translated to back then, but when he was in his NBA days, he could pass the basketball as good as anyone in the NBA, especially centers.
Well, and he was also playing with a lungs full of like a pack of heaters every game. He and Vlade both with the whole ability to dime it out and smoke a whole carton right there before game time. Amazing. But I would argue that I think he's in that conversation. Again, I was around for the heyday of Brad Doherty, who was super fun to watch pass the basketball as well. I mean, I think we've had some great passing big men. And to the point that you guys made about centers, it is coming back a little bit because you do have an MVP argument for Embiid. If Denver somehow takes off, I think there's one for, the Joker. And I think you also could have a fringe argument. I don't know that it rises to that level, but Gobert's defense is so game-changing at times that if Utah does go on a run, I mean, there's a small fringy dark argument you could have there as well. But I think there are decent centers in the league, and I think we're starting to see that. I think we saw hints of that with James Wiseman when we got the little look at what he could be moving forward. I think next year, looking ahead to Evan Mobley, I think there's going to be some really good big guys in this league moving forward.
I kind of see it as the ebb and flow of the NBA culture or how it goes strategically. And that the 90s, you had the dominant big man. Everyone who was any good had a big man. And then it kind of went slowly but surely to your power forwards became more skilled, and your centers got smaller and smaller. And then you saw the epitome of it the last 2 years with PJ Tucker starting at the 5 for Houston, and teams played small ball. And then you get these guys developed like Jokich and Embiid and those guys who can score with their back to the basket from the block, which is something we haven't seen really a whole lot of in several years. And they can just dominate these smaller, more athletic, more run and gun type of, the shot blocking, rebounding centers. And so it's kind of trending back that way of you can have good centers that stay their butt on the block or in the high post and have their back to the basket 90% of the possession, and win with that as well.
Yeah. Well, as we bump into our time slot here, I do want to say thanks to Chris for coming on and hanging out with us. It's been a real pleasure for me getting to hear you talk a little bit about, your upbringing and how you came to the area, and then hear a little bit more about your Kings fandom. I did notice on Twitter the other day that you're closing in on 200,000 tweets. Do you have anything special planned for your 200,000th tweet?
I didn't even realize somebody could tweet that much. I have no idea. I'll have to go back and look. Now I'm going to have to open a fine bottle of wine for this or something.
Oh yeah, only the finest.
Hey, I really appreciate the opportunity to sit with you. I'm sorry for the KHQA Wi-Fi. They had to pay my salary, so apparently we couldn't afford the good stuff this month. But you guys have been a treat, a great conversation. And another time I will make my argument to you why Oscar Robertson is the second best point guard of all time.
Hey, I am with you, Chris. I don't know about of all
God bless you,
time,
Cody.
but I am with you on the Oscar Robertson train.
God bless you.
Well, hey, and to relay on what Evan said, we appreciate you. You know, we appreciate greatly what you do in the community. We all love watching your stuff and how much you've done for the community, and it's our pleasure and our honor to have you on here and talk with you. And it was just cool to get to have you in a relaxed setting like this and just get to pick your brain sports wise.
Well, the pleasure was all mine. You guys are doing a great job. Thank you for the invite. And sometime, if you ever need anybody and you're hard up for a guest again, I look better with no picture on here. So this is probably the best viewpoint you'll ever get of my bald head.
Well, you have an open invitation, Chris. An open invitation to join us.
Again, good work, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Be sure to check this out on YouTube or check it out anywhere you guys listen to podcasts. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, who's one of our sponsors. So we really appreciate all the views and likes. Be sure to subscribe to YouTube while you're there. Drop us a like on Facebook. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your grandma. We appreciate everything.